The early morning sun cast a pale gold over the Nevada desert, but for Sargent it barely mattered. She adjusted the straps of her backpack and stared at the training base sprawled before her. Dust swirled in the wind, clinging to the worn buildings and the endless expanse of asphalt that led to the armory. Every new recruit had the same wide-eyed nervousness, but was sharper, fueled by more than fear. She wanted to prove herself, not to her peers, not even to the officers who would grade her. She wanted to prove she belonged. Had grown up in the rugged outskirts of Phoenix, Arizona, the daughter of a single father who worked as a mechanic. From a young age, she had learned that tools, machines, and people could break under stress, but only those who failed to understand them. Her father had always said, "If you don't respect the tools you work with, you're finished before you start." That lesson had stuck with her. And now, as she walked toward the armory, she wondered whether it would apply to her in a place where her peers saw her as weak. Inside the armory, the smell of oil, metal, and gunpowder hung heavy in the air. Rows of rifles gleamed under the fluorescent lights, polished to perfection, each one a silent testament to the soldiers who had handled them before. Stepped forward, boots clicking against the cold concrete floor. She had trained for this, read the manuals, memorized the safety checks, but nothing could prepare her for what was about to happen. The armory clerk barked without looking up. His voice carried a mix of disdain and amusement. "You get the old M16 over there, the one with the rust. Don't drop it." His eyes flicked to the weapon he tossed toward her. Rust marred the barrel and the stock, pitted and flacking as though it had survived 100 battles and then been abandoned. The other recruits snickered, leaning against the walls, whispering jokes she could hear even over her own heartbeat. "Guess they figured she couldn't handle a real weapon," one muttered. Another laughed. "Better make sure it doesn't fall apart when she fires it. Don't want anyone hurt." Caught their glances but didn't reply. She knelt to inspect the rifle, fingers tracing the grooves and rusted edges. It was heavier than it looked, but it felt alive under her touch. She murmured quietly, almost to herself, "Let's see if you still work." There was no bravado in her voice, just quiet certainty. The squad continued their laughter, but she didn't flinch. For a moment it seemed as if the desert itself had paused, waiting to see what this young recruit would do. Her hands moved over the weapon, checking the chamber, the magazine, the safety. Every part, every mechanism was meticulously inspected. Her father's lessons echoed in her mind: patience, respect, understanding. Tools had temperaments just like people. Misread them and they could fail you. But if you approached them properly, they could do extraordinary things. Captain Briggs, a man with a reputation for strict discipline, entered the armory quietly, observing from a distance. He had seen many recruits come and go, many crumble under mockery or fear. Something about his composure caught his attention. She wasn't nervous in the usual way. She wasn't arrogant either. She was focused, and there was a quiet fire in her eyes. He had a gut feeling that this young woman was going to prove them all wrong, but he didn't intervene yet. He wanted to watch. Slung the rusty rifle over her shoulder, lifting it carefully as though it were an extension of her own body. Her boots crunched against the gravel as she walked toward the training grounds. The whispers and laughter followed her, a constant hum at the edge of her focus. But she didn't let it disturb her. She had been underestimated before in life, and every time she had turned doubt into determination. This would be no different. The other recruits clustered near the first obstacle course, rifles held like ornaments rather than instruments. They glanced at with skepticism, whispering, comparing themselves to her as if she were an anomaly that didn't belong in their world. "She'll be the first to fail," one said under his breath. Another smirked, nudging his friend. "Maybe the rifle will give out first." Approached the first firing line. She knelt down, cleaned the barrel once more with a rag she carried in her pocket, and checked her aim. The rust flakes fell away like ash, carried by the desert wind. She raised the rifle to her shoulder, eyes narrowing at the distant target. The world seemed to shrink to that moment. The sun, the dust, the mocking voices, all faded into the background. She was entirely focused on the weapon and the task ahead. Her first shot rang out clear and sharp. Heads turned. The sound seemed almost impossible from that battered, mocked rifle. She fired again, each shot deliberate, controlled, precise. Her fingers and mind moved as one, and the weapon responded perfectly. The target set up to test the recruits was hit dead center every time. A murmur spread through the crowd. Some of the more confident recruits stepped back, suddenly aware that was not what they expected. One of her peers whispered, incredulous, How is she doing that?" Another muttered, "It's that old rifle, there's no way." But Captain Briggs knew the truth before they did. The weapon wasn't the miracle, was. The rust and neglect mattered nothing. Skill, focus, and relentless patience mattered everything. When the drill ended, stood, rifle resting lightly against her hip. She didn't celebrate, didn't gloat. She simply wiped the sweat from her brow and allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. Around her, the recruits looked stunned. The laughter had died. The whispers were gone. Doubt had turned into something new, respect though unspoken, and unease in those who thought themselves better. His first day had been mocked, ridiculed, and underestimated. By evening, the very people who had laughed were reconsidering everything they thought they knew about her. The rusted rifle had been her weapon, but it had also been her proving ground. It was a reminder that strength often hides behind the most unassuming faces, and that mastery is earned, not given. As the desert wind swept across the training base, carrying dust and faint echoes of laughter long gone, walked back to the barracks. She had survived her first test, and more importantly, she had planted the seed of fear and admiration in the hearts of everyone who doubted her. Tomorrow, the battlefield would be waiting, but she was ready. She always would be. Her eyes, steady and calm, reflected only one truth. They had laughed at her, and they were about to regret it. The night fell over the Nevada desert, cloaking the training base in shadows that stretched like fingers over the cracked asphalt. Inside the barracks, recruits huddled over their gear, swapping stories, boasting about past achievements, or quietly bemoaning the day's drills. However, sat alone on the edge of her bunk, the dim glow of a single overhead bulb illuminating her hands as she worked. In front of her lay the rifle, the very weapon that had been laughed at, the same one that had proved her worth earlier that day. Its surface was dull, pitted with rust, but in her hands it held promise. Her fingers traced the grooves and imperfections, almost reverently, as if acknowledging every battle it had survived. Had learned early that tools, machines, and even people had rhythms, weaknesses, and temperaments. Misread them and disaster followed. Respect them and they could achieve extraordinary things. That night she treated the rifle like a partner, dismantling every component piece by piece, cleaning each spring, each pin, each rusted edge. Dust and corrosion fell away onto a rag beneath her hands, but she didn't rush. Patience was her ally, and she had plenty of it. The barracks were alive with whispers from her peers, curious about her solitary focus. Still obsessing over that old thing, one of them called, smirking. It's rusted. Even if it fires, it won't last the week. Another snickered from across the room. Maybe it'll explode in your hands next drill. Didn't respond. Words were meaningless unless paired with action. She worked in silence, her mind analyzing the weapon's mechanics with the precision of a surgeon. Years of helping her father in the auto shop had taught her to notice details others missed. The subtle tension in a spring, the slight misalignment of a pin, the sound a mechanism made when it was functioning perfectly. She knew this rifle's imperfections intimately, and more importantly, she knew it could be trusted if treated properly. Her hands were raw by the time she finished. Tiny abrasions covered her fingers, but she welcomed them as proof of effort. For most recruits, cleaning a weapon was routine, for it was ritual. Every part she inspected, cleaned, and reassembled was a step toward mastery. She tested the mechanism again and again, dry firing in controlled bursts. Each click echoed in the quiet barracks like a heartbeat, affirming that the rifle was responding to her will. Captain Briggs, ever the observer, walked quietly past the open barracks door. He had watched her all day, from the armory to the training field, and now he saw her dedication in a new light. Where others saw rust, mockery, and imperfection, she saw opportunity. She treated her weapon with respect, patience, and meticulous care, qualities that separated the ordinary from the extraordinary. Briggs made a mental note. This young recruit had potential that could not be ignored. Hours passed. The barracks grew quieter as recruits fell asleep but remained awake, working by the dim light. She visualized the battlefield in her mind, imagining scenarios, ambushes, and the chaos that could erupt in a real combat situation. In her imagination, the rusty rifle became an extension of her body, each movement synchronized, each shot deliberate. The laughter of her peers, the doubts of her instructors, even the scorching heat of the desert, they all became irrelevant. Only skill, precision, and focus mattered. The next morning's dedication was about to be tested further. The squad assembled for another day of drills, their eyes still filled with lingering skepticism. They had witnessed her accuracy before, but her methods, the quiet, obsessive care she gave to her rifle, were unusual, almost unsettling. As they marched toward the mock battlefield, whispers followed her. "She won't last the first ambush," someone muttered. Another added, "The rifle is going to jam, I'm calling it now." Ignored them. Every step she took, every breath she drew, reinforced her resolve. The rifle, heavy but familiar, rested against her shoulder, ready for the day's challenges. In her mind, she prepared herself not just to fire, but to command. The desert heat beat down on the recruits as they reached the training grounds, but she welcomed it. Every distraction was an opportunity to prove control over chaos. During the morning drills, her squad faced a series of rapid-fire exercises designed to test coordination under pressure. Most recruits fumbling weapons, dropping magazines, and with their team members. However, moved with deliberate precision. Each shot was clean, each maneuver calculated. The rifle, once derided for its rust and wear, responded perfectly to her skill. The others could only stare, a mix of awe and disbelief spreading across their faces. By midday, the instructors presented a new challenge, a complex obstacle course combined with timed marksmanship. Recruits were expected to navigate terrain, engage targets, and maintain communication with their squad. Peers struggled to keep pace. Their weapons jammed or misfired, their nerves frayed. But she moved through the course with calm determination. Every shot she fired hit its target, every decision was measured. The rusty rifle, polished in her hands, had become an instrument of mastery. Captain Briggs observed from the tower, binoculars trained on her movements. He had seen talented soldiers before, but few demonstrated the combination of patience, skill, and relentless focus that displayed. She had transformed what others considered a liability into her greatest advantage. The realization settled in. When tested under real combat conditions, this recruit would not only survive, she would lead. By the end of the day, efforts had changed perceptions. Her peers no longer laughed openly, though some still whispered in disbelief. The rifle, now carefully cleaned and tested again, sat at her side like a trusted companion. It was a symbol of resilience, patience, and determination. Every dent, every patch of rust, every imperfection told a story of survival and capability, just like herself. That night, as the sun dipped below the desert horizon, casting shadows over the training base, reflected on the day's lessons. The rifle had taught her more than mechanics. It had reinforced her understanding of patience, control, and respect. Mockery, doubt, and derision could be powerful motivators when transformed into discipline. She had not only mastered her weapon, but she had begun to command her own narrative. Captain Briggs walked past the barracks later that night, stopping briefly at its door. He didn't speak. He simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement of what he had witnessed. In that gesture there was recognition, respect, and perhaps a hint of awe. Didn't need words. She had proven herself quietly, methodically, and thoroughly. The rusty rifle had done more than fire bullets. It had forged confidence, skill, and the beginnings of a legend. Lay on her bunk that night, the weapon carefully stored beside her. She closed her eyes, visualizing the battlefield ahead, knowing that one day the real test would come. The rusty rifle, once a source of ridicule, had become her mentor, her ally, and the first proof that mastery can emerge from the most unlikely tools. Tomorrow, the drills would intensify, and the squad would face challenges designed to break them. But was ready. The lessons of patience, persistence, and respect she had applied to the rifle would guide her through chaos, fear, and doubt. And when the moment came to face the battlefield for real, the world would finally understand that they had underestimated her at their peril. The early morning sun burned off the fog that had settled over the Utah desert, and her unit assembled at the edge of the training grounds, the dry wind whipping sand into their faces. The drill for today was meant to simulate chaos at its most unforgiving, a surprise ambush in unfamiliar terrain. Instructors, posing as insurgents, were hidden throughout the rocky landscape, ready to challenge every instinct of the recruits. Her squad shuffled nervously, glancing at one another for reassurance. They were seasoned enough to expect tension, but nothing could prepare them for what awaited. However, moved calmly, rifle slung across her back, scanning the horizon with practiced patience. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment, not only training her body but syncing with her weapon, her mind focused on control amidst uncertainty. The rusty M16 that had been the source of ridicule now felt like a trusted extension of her senses. "Remember the protocol," Captain Briggs barked as the squad fanned out but hardly needed instructions. Her intuition was sharp, honed by long nights of preparation and the countless hours she had spent mastering her rifle. She advanced with careful steps, eyes flicking from rock to rock, shadow to shadow. Every movement was deliberate. Every sound registered in her mind: the crunch of gravel beneath a boot, the whisper of wind across the desert, the faint metallic echo of a weapon being. Within moments, chaos erupted. A hail of mock gunfire shredded the air, and smoke grenades exploded, filling the terrain with a choking haze. Squads scattered, panic flaring in their eyes. Some tripped, others stumbled over rocks, all while trying to return fire with frantic, uncontrolled shots. The instructors had designed this drill to break even the most disciplined teams, and for most of the recruits it worked. Alone in the chaos, crouched behind a jagged boulder assessing the situation, her rifle, once underestimated, was now her lifeline. She could feel its weight in her hands, hear the subtle clicks and groans of the mechanisms, and trust it as if it were an ally breathing alongside her. This was what she had trained for, moments where instinct, skill, and courage intersected, and she thrived in them. The first target emerged from behind a dust cloud, a figure moving swiftly to flank her squad. Fired, the M16 barking in response, and the instructor fell to the ground. The others didn't see what had happened immediately. To them, she was still the recruit with the rusty rifle, the one everyone had mocked. But's aim was impeccable, each shot calculated, each movement measured. The battlefield, for a moment, began to bend to her control. She shifted positions quickly, covering a teammate who was pinned behind a rock. Her fingers worked the rifle's mechanisms with precision, chambering rounds and firing in a rhythm that seemed almost unnatural in the midst of chaos. Her team watched, stunned, as one by one, obstacles and threats were neutralized under her command. They had expected panic, failure, and perhaps embarrassment, but instead they witnessed control, confidence, and skill that was undeniable. Captain Briggs, stationed at the observation tower, felt his pulse quicken. He had always been a realist, expecting mistakes, underestimating potential until proven otherwise. But there, amid the simulated smoke, sand, and fear, was standing, crouching, running, and firing with a discipline that bordered on mastery. The rusty rifle was no longer a joke. It was a tool of precision, a symbol of what could be accomplished with patience, knowledge, and determination. The ambush intensified. Instructors moved to cut off their retreat, laying down suppressive fire. Some of squad members faltered, frozen by the sudden chaos. She didn't panic. She barked hand signals, guiding their positions, directing fire, and covering retreat paths with deadly accuracy. Her calm presence spread through the squad. One by one, they regained composure, taking cues from her movements, trusting her instinct over their fear. The lesson was clear. When others panic, the composed leader dictates the outcome. Minutes stretched like hours. Dust swirled in clouds, bullets struck rocks around them, and the desert echoed with shouts and gunfire. Through it all, remained steady, assessing, adapting, and executing. She moved from cover to cover, ensuring every teammate had a clear shot and a safe line of retreat. The instructors, relentless in their aggression, could not anticipate her tactical ingenuity. What was designed to break her team instead highlighted her brilliance. As the last simulated threat emerged, a figure sprinting from behind a ridge's focus sharpened. She fired a precise, controlled volley, neutralizing the threat before it could harm her squad. One by one, the ambushers fell, their planned advantage by a single, resolute recruit wielding a weapon everyone had dismissed. The smoke cleared, revealing the battlefield. Rocks scattered, sand churned, and the squad, though exhausted, stood alive and unharmed. All because had remained calm, controlled, and decisive. Her team looked at her in disbelief. The same girl they had mocked, the one who had received a rusty rifle as a joke, had single-handedly turned chaos into order. They had expected panic and failure. Instead, they had witnessed competence and leadership under extreme pressure. For the first time, the squad saw her not as a rookie, but as the person they would follow in real combat. Captain Briggs descended from the observation tower, moving swiftly toward her. He didn't need words to convey his astonishment. He simply nodded, eyes wide with recognition, understanding that had accomplished what few soldiers ever could. She had mastered not only her weapon but the battlefield itself. The rusty rifle had been her tool, yes, but it was her training, focus, and determination that had won the day. As the sun climbed higher over the Utah desert, the squad regrouped. There were no jokes now, no derisive whispers, only silence tinged with awe and respect. Rifle resting lightly against her shoulder allowed herself a brief smile, though her eyes scanned the horizon, anticipating the next challenge. She had faced the ambush and emerged victorious, but she knew this was only the beginning. In the barracks later that night, disassembled the rifle once more, cleaning every component with methodical precision. Each movement was deliberate, a ritual that reinforced her bond with the weapon. Dust and rust flakes fell onto the rag beneath her hands, but she welcomed them. They were reminders of the day's battle and the lessons learned. She knew the battlefield would demand even more, and she intended to be ready. The ambush had not just been a test of marksmanship. It was a test of resolve, strategy, and mental fortitude. Had passed with distinction. The squad would never forget it, and neither would the instructors or Captain Briggs. In the chaos of the battlefield, one truth had become clear. Underestimated, mocked, and doubted, had shown that skill, courage, and relentless focus could overcome anything, even a weapon deemed unworthy. As night fell and the desert's chill replaced the day's heat, lay on her bunk, eyes fixed on the ceiling. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more drills, and more skepticism from those who had yet to understand her. But she was ready. Her rifle, once ridiculed, now symbolized mastery, and her confidence had grown stronger than ever. She had faced chaos and emerged not just unbroken, but transformed. And as she drifted towards sleep, one thought resonated clearly in her mind. When the real battlefield arrived, no ambush, no weapon, no enemy would ever catch her unprepared. The Utah desert had become a furnace under the midday sun, the heat shimmering off the rocky terrain in waves that distorted vision. And her squad had been moving through the simulated battlefield for nearly an hour, engaging targets, navigating obstacles, and coordinating movements in an environment designed to simulate total chaos. The drills had been intense, designed to break nerves, and for many recruits the stress was beginning to show. Sweat-streaked faces, muscles cramped, and breathing became labored. Yet moved with a steady grace, her rifle, once a source of mockery, held firmly, ready, responsive. They reached a narrow canyon, its jagged walls forcing the squad into a single-file formation. Led the line, her eyes scanning for the instructors hiding among rocks and boulders. Every shadow could conceal a threat, every movement could be a trap. She had faced ambushes before, but this drill was designed to push her to her limits. Her mind raced, mapping angles, estimating distances, predicting trajectories. The rusty M16 felt alive in her hands. Each shot a conversation between her skill and the weapon's mechanics. Suddenly, the first shots of a new wave of enemy fire cracked through the air. Bullets ricocheted off rocks, kicking up dust and sand into the squad's eyes. Returned fire, but as she squeezed the trigger, a loud metallic click rang out and the rifle failed to fire. Her heart leapt for a fraction of a second as adrenaline surged. The weapon she had trusted, polished, and mastered had malfunctioned at the worst possible moment. Around her, chaos erupted. Her teammates panicked. Some screamed, others dove behind rocks without coordinating movements. A few froze entirely, unsure of what to do. The instructors were pressing forward, exploiting the confusion. His mind cleared, instinct overriding panic. Years of experience fixing broken machines with her father's guidance kicked in. Tools failed when the operator panicked. Calm hands could breathe life into the seemingly broken. She had faced rust, neglect, and mockery. This was simply another challenge. Dropping to one knee, she stripped the rifle open in a practiced motion. Dust and rust flakes fell to the ground as she worked quickly but deliberately. Her fingers moved with precision over the spring, the chamber, the firing pin. Each component was checked, cleaned, and adjusted in seconds. The surrounding chaos, the shouts, the gunfire, the sand stinging her eyes, was filtered out. There was only her and the rifle. One mechanical failure would not dictate the outcome. As she reassembled the weapon, she barked instructions to her squad using hand signals she had perfected over weeks of silent practice. Move left, cover the ridge, keep low. Some of the soldiers looked to her in disbelief, seeing calm authority where before they had only seen fear. She ignored their stunned expressions, focusing entirely on the mechanical rhythm of the rifle. The click of metal, the snap of the chamber, the subtle alignment of the sights. It was a symphony she conducted alone amidst the chaos. Finally, she chambered a round, one deep, controlled breath. She raised the rifle and fired. The shot rang true, echoing against the canyon walls. The instructor target fell. Another followed, and another. With each shot, the panic surrounding her began to dissipate. Her teammates, inspired by her composure and precision, began to rally, mimicking her movements, trusting her instinct over their own fear. What had been a moment of potential disaster became a pivot point, the turning tide of the simulated ambush. Captain Briggs, observing from the tower, tightened his jaw. He had seen many soldiers under pressure, and many had crumbled when weapons failed or chaos erupted. However, had done the opposite. She had transformed a malfunction into mastery, fear into control, and potential defeat into a demonstration of lethal competence. Her eyes, scanning constantly, caught movement before it became a threat, each shot a calculated response. The rusty rifle, now functioning perfectly, had become a weapon of precision in capable hands. The squad, emboldened by her example, began to coordinate more effectively. Led them through the canyon, neutralizing targets and covering flanks, her rifle spitting rounds in a rhythm that synchronized with her commands. Each team member's movement became predictable to her trained eyes, allowing her to anticipate weaknesses and reinforce strengths. The instructor's ambush tactics, which had relied on surprise and confusion, were being systematically dismantled by a single recruit wielding what had once been a joke. Minutes passed like hours. Dust and smoke clung to everything, painting the battlefield in shades of gray. Sweat and grit streaked faces and adrenaline pumped through every muscle. Yet calm remained unbroken. The jam had tested her confidence and her connection to her weapon, and she had passed with distinction. Her hands, steady and precise, had transformed a malfunction into a teaching moment for both herself and her squad. She was no longer merely a participant. She was the pivot around which the battlefield rotated. The final wave of instructor targets appeared, attempting to encircle the squad. Fired, covering her team as they maneuvered into safer positions. Shots rang out in harmony with her commands, each member responding with precision, confidence, and trust. The ambush, designed to simulate overwhelming force, was neutralized. The squad emerged victorious, not because of superior numbers, but because one soldier had maintained control when all else seemed lost. The rusty rifle had become more than a weapon. It was a testament to her discipline, patience, and skill. As the smoke cleared and the echoes of gunfire faded, stood, rifle resting lightly against her shoulder. Her chest heaved from exertion, dust clinging to her skin, but her gaze was steady and unwavering. Around her, her squad regrouped, faces reflecting awe, respect, and disbelief. They had witnessed firsthand the transformation of panic into precision, doubt into action, had turned a malfunction into mastery, proving that courage, focus, and relentless preparation could overcome even the most adverse circumstances. Captain Briggs approached, his face a mixture of astonishment and approval. He stopped just short of her, eyes scanning the battlefield she had just dominated. For the first time, he spoke without his usual stern demeanor. "You just turned a weapon failure into a complete tactical advantage. That's impressive." Allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. Words were unnecessary, the battlefield had already spoken. Later that night, back at the barracks, carefully disassembled the rifle again, inspecting each component. Her hands, though scraped and blistered, worked with practiced precision. Dust, rust, and grime had been eradicated, but the bond between soldier and weapon had deepened. The rifle was no longer simply a tool, it was a partner in survival, a symbol of her ability to turn adversity into advantage. The jam had been a defining moment. Where others might have faltered, had acted with calm authority, transforming potential failure into a testament to skill, discipline, and resilience. The squad had witnessed it and the instructors had documented it, and knew deep in her bones that the battlefield would demand more pressure, more chaos, more unpredictability, but she was ready. She had learned that true mastery was not about perfection. It was about adapting, overcoming, and turning even failure into victory. As she lay on her bunk that night, the desert wind rattling the window frames, allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. The jam had been a test, one she had passed without hesitation. She had proven not only to herself but to everyone around her that confidence, preparation, and relentless focus could overcome any obstacle, mechanical or human. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but she would face them as she always had, with calm determination, unyielding discipline, and a weapon she had mastered through fire, rust, and perseverance. And somewhere, deep inside, she smiled quietly, knowing that this was only the beginning of the battles where her skill and her rifle would be tested in ways few could imagine. The Utah desert sun had reached its zenith, beating down relentlessly on the rugged terrain. Dust swirled around jagged rocks, creating temporary illusions of movement that made every shadow a potential threat. Stood at the forefront of her squad, the now-cleaned M16 slung confidently across her shoulder. The ambush drill had pushed them to their limits, testing nerves, coordination, and endurance. But for the previous trials, the mockery, the rusted rifle, the jam, had all led to this moment. She was no longer a recruit. She was a leader in action. The squad had scattered during the last wave of instructors, some faltering under simulated fire, others frozen by indecision. Scanned the battlefield quickly, noting positions, potential cover points, and threats. Her eyes flicked between her teammates, silently assessing their readiness and composure. Where others saw chaos, she saw structure. Where others panicked, she remained calm. Leadership, she knew, wasn't about barking orders. It was about commanding presence and inspiring confidence. "We're pinned," one soldier shouted from behind a boulder, his voice tinged with fear. Without hesitation, she waved him forward with a hand signal, simultaneously motioning for another teammate to cover the flank. Her movements were precise, almost choreographed. Each hand gesture communicated intent, position, and timing. The squad, hesitant at first, began to respond, following her lead. She could sense their initial reluctance dissolving into focused cooperation, the kind that only emerges when one person demonstrates undeniable control in chaos. Her rifle, once laughed at for its rust and age, now roared in rhythm with her commands. Each shot neutralized threats as she moved fluidly between cover points, her eyes calculating angles, distance, and timing with military precision. She adjusted fire for team members, signaling them to take advantage of blind spots while keeping the instructors' positions in mind. The squad was no longer reacting. They were executing a plan she had formulated in seconds. Captain Briggs, observing from the watchtower, lowered his binoculars, momentarily speechless. He had trained and evaluated countless recruits, yet performance expectation. She had transformed panic into strategy, indecision into coordination, and fear into disciplined action. What had started as a simulated ambush was now a display of tactical brilliance under duress. Briggs realized that wasn't merely responding to the situation, she was dictating it. The instructors, hidden behind rocks and boulders, attempted to adjust their ambush, hopping to exploit gaps in the squad's formation, but anticipated their movements, calculating angles and reaction times instinctively. She issued hand signals, directing suppressive fire to cover advancing teammates while herself neutralizing threats from elevated positions. The squad moved in cohesion, inspired by her example, each member trusting her instinct over their own hesitation. The pace of the engagement accelerated. Bullets ricocheted off rocks, and smoke from simulated grenades swirled around the unit. Some squad members faltered, missing shots or failing to cover assigned zones. Adjusted instantly, redirecting their fire, repositioning them for safety, and providing encouragement through precise gestures and calm demeanor. Her ability to maintain composure under relentless pressure became a beacon, transforming the morale of the entire unit. One soldier, previously frozen by fear, looked to for direction. She met his gaze and gave a brief nod, signaling both approval and instruction. Immediately, he moved into position, firing effectively at a concealed target. Around her, the squad's confidence grew exponentially with every coordinated maneuver. They were no longer a group of scattered, uncertain recruits. They were a unit, guided by the focus and command of a single determined soldier. The final wave of instructor targets emerged, attempting a coordinated assault from multiple directions. Anticipated this, positioning her squad defensively while covering their retreat paths. She fired carefully, each shot calculated to suppress and neutralize threats. Her squad followed, moving efficiently under her direction, neutralizing obstacles and clearing the field systematically. The ambush drill, designed to simulate overwhelming chaos, was being dismantled in a display of precision leadership. Her voice, though not raised, cut through the chaos in the form of sharp hand signals and subtle gestures. Every teammate understood her intent, executing it flawlessly. Moved between positions with effortless agility, rifle poised and ready, scanning for any sign of threat. She became the central node in a complex web of action, and the battlefield bent around her decisions. Where once her peers had doubted her, they now trusted her implicitly. Captain Briggs descended from the watchtower as the dust settled, moving quickly toward. He surveyed the squad, noting how they had regained cohesion, neutralized all instructor targets, and maintained discipline despite the intensity of the drill. His gaze finally settled on her. There was no laughter in his expression now, only awe. He said, voice low but firm, "You didn't just survive that ambush, you commanded it. That's extraordinary." Allowed herself a small smile but remained vigilant. She knew that success wasn't about recognition. It was about ensuring every team member returned unscathed, and that every tactical decision achieved its intended purpose. Her focus never wavered, even as instructors began to exit the field, signaling the end of the drill. She had transformed uncertainty into command, fear into action, and a mockery of a rusty rifle into a symbol of authority and precision. Later at the debriefing, the squad remained unusually quiet. Normally, they would chatter and joke about failures or successes. This time, their silence was respectful, almost reverent. Each recruit reflected on what they had witnessed, the calm control, tactical insight, and fearless execution demonstrated by one soldier. Had not only completed the drill successfully, she had set a standard of leadership that none could ignore. Instructors praised the squad's performance but reserved special recognition for her ability to direct under fire, anticipate enemy movements, and coordinate her team was exceptional. The rusty rifle had fired reliably, yes, But it had been her discipline, judgment, and composure that had turned the tide. Every recruit, every observer, every instructor noted that they had just witnessed something remarkable, the birth of a leader in full command of herself, her team, and her environment. That evening, as the squad returned to the barracks, carefully cleaned her rifle once again. Each movement was deliberate, a ritual that reaffirmed her connection to the weapon and her readiness for future challenges. The jam earlier in the week, the initial mockery, and the uncertainty of the battlefield had all forged her resolve. She understood now more than ever that leadership was not about charisma or volume. It was about presence, decisiveness, and the ability to transform fear into controlled action. Captain Briggs stopped by the barracks before leaving, briefly acknowledging her work. "You've changed the dynamic in this unit," he said quietly. "People will follow you because they have to, not because they're told to. That's rare." Nodded, accepting the praise silently. Words were unnecessary. The battlefield had spoken for her, demonstrating her skill, command, and unyielding focus. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the desert base, reflected on the day's events. The ambush had been a crucible, testing everything she had prepared for, and she had emerged not just successful but transformed. She had proven to herself, and to those who doubted her, that courage, skill, and leadership could overcome even the most daunting challenges. The rusty rifle had been her partner, but it was her resolve that had dictated the outcome. In that moment, understood a crucial truth. The battlefield demanded not only weapons, strength, and training, but presence, foresight, and unshakable composure. She had demonstrated all three, and as she prepared for the next day, for the next drill, she knew the real test lay ahead, the point where simulation would meet reality, and when that time came, would be ready to lead. The desert wind had cooled as the sun sank low, casting long shadows over the Utah training grounds. Dust settled slowly, drifting over spent casings, overturned rocks, and the footprints of soldiers who had scrambled, ducked, and fired under the chaos of the day's ambush drills. Stood in the center of the cleared battlefield, the once-mocked M16 slung lightly over her shoulder. Sweat streaked her face, dust clung to her uniform, and her chest heaved slightly with exertion, but her gaze was steady, unflinching. Around her, the squad she had commanded was gathering, exhausted and wide-eyed, processing what had just occurred. For hours afterward, the field had been a silent monument to discipline, skill, and precision. Her squad members lingered, some kneeling, others leaning against rocks, silently acknowledging the difference between chaos and control. They had been trained to respond to ambushes, to communicate under fire, to follow protocol, but had elevated the drill to a new level. Her movements had been more than tactical. They had been authoritative, decisive, and calm under pressure. And the squad, once doubting, now followed her instinctively, trusting her judgment even when bullets whizzed past them and smoke obscured every line of sight. Captain Briggs arrived on the scene, dust clinging to the cuffs of his uniform, eyes scanning the area in quiet assessment. He had watched throughout the drills, noting every shot fired, every hand signal, every calm decision amid panic. The instructor's efforts to create confusion, fear, and disarray had been neutralized, not by superior numbers, nor by technology, but by a single soldier wielding focus, preparation, and discipline as her primary weapons. Briggs's respect was evident in the measured pace of his approach, in the rare absence of critique or reprimand. The squad had gathered around her now, some still catching their breath. They avoided direct eye contact at first, uncertain whether to acknowledge their amazement verbally. Standing tall and composed, surveyed them calmly. The air was heavy with unspoken recognition. In the chaos of the ambush, she had demonstrated not only her mastery of the rifle, but also her ability to inspire coordination and efficiency in others. Each team member could feel the transformation. What they had thought was luck or accident was, in fact, skill refined through discipline and experience. One soldier, the youngest of the squad, finally spoke, voice tinged with awe. "Sergeant, we didn't expect you to handle it like that. We panicked and you just, I don't know, commanded everything." His words were halting, reflecting a combination of relief, disbelief, and newfound respect. Eyes softened briefly, acknowledging the statement without breaking her composure. Leadership was not about ego or accolades. It was about ensuring that every team member survived and performed to the best of their ability. Another member of the squad, a burly recruit who had been skeptical since the day arrived, stepped forward. He offered a nod, terse but meaningful. "You saved us today," he admitted quietly, almost as if saying it out loud would make it real. There was no sarcasm in his voice, only respect. Allowed herself a slight nod in return, recognizing that her influence had shifted from theory to tangible proof. The squad had seen her competence under fire, and they could not unsee it. Captain Briggs finally spoke, his voice low but carrying authority. "What you've done here isn't just skill, it's leadership. You didn't just clear the ambush, you coordinated your squad, managed fear, and adapted to every obstacle in real time. That's rare, that's exceptional." His words hung in the air, a mixture of acknowledgement and quiet admiration. Remained silent, knowing that the work had spoken for itself. Praise was unnecessary. The battlefield had already delivered the verdict. The instructors gathered, reviewing notes and tallying performance metrics. Normally, the squad would be evaluated as a whole, with minor critiques applied to individuals. This time, the assessment was different. Actions had not just succeeded, they had elevated the performance of every teammate. Scores, statistics, and observations reflected what everyone in the desert already knew. This was no ordinary soldier. This was someone who could turn panic into strategy, chaos into coordination, and ridicule into respect. As the team packed up, took a moment to inspect her rifle once more. The weapon, now clean and reliable, rested in her hands as if aware of the trials it had endured alongside her. Rust, once a symbol of weakness and mockery, had been replaced with disciplined care, demonstrating that even tools judged as inadequate could be extraordinary in capable hands. Each component had been maintained meticulously, reflecting her commitment to mastery and preparation. The squad moved back toward the barracks in silence, the day's events weighing heavily in their minds. Walked at the center, a quiet presence that no longer needed to command through words alone. Every movement she made communicated competence and assurance. Even those who had mocked her initially now followed instinctively, relying on her judgment, silently acknowledging her authority. The shift in dynamic was unmistakable. She had become the axis around which the team operated. Back at the barracks, the squad gathered for a debriefing. Normally, there would be banter, complaints, and casual critiques. This time, the atmosphere was different. The instructors recounted the exercise, noting points of success, errors, and lessons learned. But everyone's attention kept drifting back to. She had not only performed flawlessly but had elevated the squad's performance through calm authority, calculated decisions, and precise execution. They were all witnesses to a transformation that went beyond technical skill. It was the birth of leadership under fire. Captain Briggs addressed the squad directly, voice carrying a rare weight of admiration. "What you saw today is what leadership looks like. It's not about who fires first or who is loudest. It's about control, coordination, and composure under extreme pressure. Sergeant demonstrated all of that and more. Learn from her example, follow her lead, trust her instincts. You may find that in times of real danger, your survival depends on it." His words lingered in the room, impressing upon the recruits the gravity of what had occurred. Later that evening, returned to her bunk. The adrenaline had subsided, replaced by a deep awareness of what she had accomplished. The desert wind rattled the barracks windows, carrying with it the faint echo of the day's chaos. She carefully cleaned her rifle once more, each motion precise, deliberate, and meditative. Dust and residue fell away, leaving a polished instrument that symbolized both skill and perseverance. The bond between soldier and weapon had deepened further, forged in trials of both mockery and simulated combat. As night fell, reflected on the lessons of the day. She had faced fear, uncertainty, and skepticism, not only from the instructors and her peers, but from within herself. Yet she had turned these challenges into opportunity, demonstrating that preparation, focus, and patience were more powerful than any weapon or external circumstance. Her squad had witnessed the transformation, and the battlefield had provided proof. Or the journey was far from over. The drills were simulations, and real combat would demand even more resilience, skill, and tactical ingenuity. But she had established a foundation, a reputation perhaps, that would follow her into every future engagement. The respect she had earned today would shape her influence, her confidence, and the trust of those around her. She had proven unequivocally that courage and mastery could turn doubt into action, fear into control, and ridicule into reverence. As the barracks settled into quiet, lay on her bunk, rifle carefully stored beside her. The desert night outside whispered through the cracks in the walls, carrying with it both challenge and possibility. She closed her eyes, aware that tomorrow would bring new drills, tougher scenarios, and perhaps renewed skepticism. But she was ready. The day's lessons, hard-earned and visceral, had prepared her not only to survive but to lead. And somewhere deep inside smiled quietly. She had earned her place, she had earned her squad's trust, and she had shown the first glimmers of the legend she would become. The battlefield had witnessed it, the instructors had recorded it, the squad would not forget it, and the rusty rifle that had been mocked, it had become a symbol, a testament to skill, resilience, and command. The early dawn light cut through the horizon like shards of glass, painting the Nevada desert in sharp gold and red. Stood at the edge of the forward operating base, her squad assembled behind her, eyes alert but visibly tense. Unlike the training drills she had mastered, today was different. Today, the exercises were no longer simulations. This was a live operation, real combat in a hostile zone where every sound, every shadow, and every decision could determine life or death. Her rifle, meticulously cleaned and maintained through countless drills, rested against her shoulder. It was no longer rusty, no longer a subject of ridicule. It was an extension of herself, an instrument of precision, a partner she trusted implicitly. Every round loaded, every mechanism adjusted, every motion rehearsed countless times now would be tested under real threat. Had trained for this moment for years, but nothing could completely prepare anyone for the unpredictable chaos of true combat. The mission was straightforward yet perilous. The squad was tasked with clearing a narrow canyon where enemy forces had been detected, ensuring safe passage for supply convoys. Intelligence suggested ambushes along the path. This was precisely the type of environment designed to exploit hesitation and panic, but had faced worse in training. She had honed her instincts to read movement, interpret danger, and react with speed and precision. As the squad moved through the canyon, the terrain reminded her of the drills, the jagged rocks, the dust, the narrowing paths, but everything felt sharper, heavier, more real. Each footstep could betray their presence. The wind carried subtle hints of movement, a shift in sand, a flutter of cloth, the metallic echo of weapons being. Senses were heightened, each nerve alert, each decision deliberate. Her squad followed silently, instinctively attuned to her leadership. They trusted her. Suddenly, gunfire erupted from above the canyon walls. The enemy had been waiting. Rocks ricocheted from the hail of bullets, sand stinging exposed skin. The squad ducked for cover. Chaos erupted but remained calm. Years of training, previous ambush drills, and the lessons learned from a once rusty rifle crystallized into instinctive action. She identified the origin of the fire, calculated angles, and returned precise suppressive shots to create space for her team. "Left flank, cover the ridge," she commanded, signaling one teammate forward while taking point herself to cover the squad's advance. The enemy attempted to exploit panic, firing from multiple directions, but control was absolute. Her hand movements were fluid, precise, guiding her squad in real time as bullets tore through rocks and sand around them. Every shot she fired was calculated, neutralizing threats efficiently while conserving ammunition. The squad, initially hesitant under live fire, began to mirror her composure. Her calm determination acted as an anchor, steadying nerves and restoring focus. Each teammate moved with renewed coordination, following her commands without hesitation. His presence transformed the unit from a group of anxious soldiers into a cohesive, efficient force capable of overcoming ambush tactics. The lessons of training, the drills, the jams, the ambush simulations, were no longer theoretical. They were reality in action. Amidst the firefight, noticed movement on the far side of the canyon, a secondary enemy squad attempting to flank them. Without hesitation, she adjusted her position, signaling two teammates to provide suppressive fire while she maneuvered to intercept the threat. Her eyes calculated distance, timing, and angles in seconds. Each decision was precise, deliberate, and lethal. The enemy was fast, but was faster. Her rifle, once mocked for rust, now performed flawlessly, responding to every command of her hand and mind. The confrontation escalated, bullets whizzing past, rocks exploding under impact. Moved like a shadow, agile and deliberate, covering her teammates while neutralizing threats with pinpoint accuracy. One by one, enemy combatants fell, unable to anticipate her timing or adaptability. Her squad moved in synchrony, understanding instinctively that following her lead was the only way to survive. Where fear might have crippled lesser soldiers, they became a unit defined by focus, strategy, and confidence. Captain Briggs, observing from a nearby command post via drone feed, felt a familiar mix of awe and relief. He had seen handle simulations with precision, but this was different. Real combat amplified every mistake, yet she remained flawless in execution. Her actions were not reactive, they were proactive, anticipating enemy movements, creating space, and controlling the battlefield in a way few soldiers ever achieved. Hours passed like minutes. The canyon, once a potential death trap, was systematically cleared. Its leadership ensured minimal exposure to risk, with every teammate accounted for, every enemy threat neutralized efficiently. The squad, exhausted and dust-covered, moved as one entity, each member relying on her judgment, instinct, and skill. Its mastery over her rifle and her squad had transformed potential chaos into controlled, strategic action. As the last of the enemy positions fell silent, surveyed the battlefield. Rocks scattered, dust still hanging in the air, and the echo of gunfire slowly faded. Every team member was accounted for, unharmed, and their mission objectives achieved. The reality of what they had survived began to sink in. What could have been a deadly ambush had been neutralized by one soldier's calm authority, precise skill, and leadership under fire. Her squad gathered around her, some shaking, some silently in awe, all reflecting on the intensity of the mission. The trust they had developed over weeks of drills and simulations now crystallized into respect and reliance. They had learned under fire that judgment was precise, her instincts impeccable, and her resolve unshakable. She had transformed fear into coordinated action, turning what could have been a disaster into a decisive victory. Captain Briggs arrived shortly afterward, meeting on the cleared battlefield. He did not need to speak in the usual commanding tone. The results spoke for themselves. Every target neutralized, every teammate unharmed, every objective achieved. He said quietly, voice carrying both approval and awe, "You've done more than complete a mission. You've demonstrated command, precision, and leadership under conditions that would have broken most soldiers. That's exceptional." Merely nodded, aware that the real reward was her squad's survival and cohesion. That night back at the forward operating base, cleaned her rifle meticulously once again. The desert sun had left grit and dust, but it had also been a crucible that proved her mastery. She reflected on the mission, aware that real combat demanded more than skill with a weapon. It demanded leadership, foresight, adaptability, and courage. She had faced these challenges and emerged not only successful, but respected by every teammate, peer, and superior who had observed her performance. Lay in her bunk that night, fatigue heavy in her body but her mind sharp and alert. She thought of the rusted rifle she had first been given, of the mockery and doubt she had endured, and of the lessons learned in ambush drills and jammed weapons. Every trial had prepared her for this moment. Every failure, every challenge, every painstaking hour of practice had culminated in her ability to lead, to survive, and to dominate under conditions that most soldiers could not endure. The desert night was quiet, but the echoes of the day's combat lingered in her mind. She knew the real battlefield could be even more unforgiving, more chaotic, more lethal. Yet she also knew she was ready. She had mastered not only her weapon but her instincts, her decision-making, and the trust of those around her. The rifle, once a symbol of ridicule, had become a testament to perseverance, skill, and lethal competence. And she herself had become more than a soldier. She had become a leader, capable of commanding presence and action under fire. As sleep approached, his final thought was clear and unshakable. The battlefield was no longer an unknown enemy. It was a challenge she was ready to meet, a canvas on which she could demonstrate mastery, and a proving ground where her skill, leadership, and courage would shine. The world had yet to fully realize her capabilities, but one day they would. And when that day came, would be ready to take command of any battlefield, with a rifle she had mastered and a squad she had earned. The sun rose slowly over the Nevada desert, casting a warm amber glow over the forward operating base. Stood outside, scanning the horizon with the same intensity she had displayed during every drill, jam, ambush, and live fire operation. But this morning felt different. The battlefield had tested her in every conceivable way, and she had emerged not just unbroken, but respected, feared in skill, and recognized as a leader among her peers. Today, she would finally see the full weight of her transformation, not only in her own eyes, but in the eyes of those who had once doubted her. The squad gathered around, uniformed soldiers, weary from days of rigorous operations but standing taller, eyes reflecting both respect and admiration. Where once they had whispered behind her back, mocked her, and questioned her capability, there was now a quiet reverence. They looked at her not as a fellow recruit or even just another soldier, but as a symbol of mastery, determination, and leadership. Every lesson, every challenge, every trial had built to this point. Captain Briggs approached, his usual stern demeanor softened by genuine acknowledgement. He had observed her evolution from the moment she arrived, noting her discipline, skill, and resilience. Today, he would make her accomplishments official, and the weight of recognition hung heavily in the warm desert air. He said quietly but firmly, "You've transformed the perception of what's possible in this unit. From the moment you handled that rusty rifle to your leadership in live combat, you've proven something extraordinary. You are a soldier, a leader, and now, a legend." Allowed herself a small, rare smile, but her focus never wavered. Recognition, though gratifying, was secondary to mastery. The battlefield, after all, demanded preparation, precision, and calm under pressure, not accolades. Yet she could feel the impact of her journey reflected in the faces of her squad, the instructors, and even her commanding officers. She had become a benchmark, a standard against which others would measure themselves, and the rifle that had once been an object of ridicule had become her emblem. The squad had been through every imaginable test: ambush drills, weapon malfunctions, live fire exercises, and real combat scenarios designed to push them to the brink. In each had not just survived, she had excelled, transforming obstacles into opportunities and doubt into coordinated action. Today, they were not merely following orders. They were following the confidence, clarity, and command of a soldier whose presence demanded trust. Each team member moved with synchronized precision, reflecting the leadership she had cultivated through relentless practice and unyielding resolve. Word of her performance had spread beyond the immediate squad. Other units and commanders, previously skeptical, now observed her as a model of skill and composure under fire. The story of the rusty rifle, once a punchline, had become legend within the military community. Its ability to maintain control, anticipate threats, and lead her team through life-threatening situations was being discussed in debriefs, lectures, and informal gatherings. She had turned ridicule into a reputation that would inspire countless recruits to follow her example. His hands, resting on the polished rifle, reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She remembered the first day she had been handed the rusty weapon, the laughter from peers, the doubt in her own mind. She recalled the jam during training, the chaos of the ambush drills, and the exhilaration and terror of her first real engagement. Every moment had forged her into a soldier capable of commanding presence and lethal efficiency. Her rifle had become an extension of her will, and through her skill, every misjudgment, every challenge had been transformed into mastery. As the squad moved through the final phase of training exercises, took the lead, her commands clear, precise, and calm. Every maneuver was executed flawlessly, her squad following instinctively. The instructors, observing from strategic points, nodded in approval, taking notes for reports that would serve as historical records of her performance. She was no longer merely a participant in training or combat. She was a benchmark, a living demonstration of what could be achieved through skill, discipline, and determination. Later in the briefing room, Captain Briggs addressed the gathered soldiers, instructors, and visiting officers. He recounted its journey, the rusty rifle, the jam, the ambush drills, the live combat scenarios, and emphasized the lessons learned. Has shown us all that skill, courage, and leadership are not defined by equipment or circumstance, he said. They are defined by discipline, focus, and the ability to act decisively under pressure. Today, she sets the standard for excellence, and every soldier in this room would do well to learn from her example. The room remained silent for a moment, the gravity of his words settling over everyone present. Standing quietly to the side, felt a quiet satisfaction. Recognition was not the goal, mastery was. Yet she understood the importance of her influence, of the example she set for others. The soldiers around her would carry her lessons forward, applying her calm authority and tactical precision in their own operations. In this sense, her legend was already growing, not just in accolades but in impact. As night fell over the desert base, walked along the perimeter, rifle at the ready but mind at ease. The day had tested her in ways no simulation ever could, yet she had emerged stronger, more focused, and more aware of her capabilities. The battlefield had confirmed what she already knew. She was ready for any challenge, any operation, any threat. Her squad trusted her implicitly, her superiors respected her unreservedly, and her peers could no longer doubt her skill. She had become a figure of both admiration and inspiration. Later, in the quiet of the barracks, disassembled her rifle, carefully cleaning and inspecting every part. The weapon, once rusty and unreliable, now gleamed under the lamplight, a symbol of persistence, training, and mastery. She reflected on how far she had come, from mockery to recognition, from self-doubt to unwavering confidence, from a recruit to a legend. Every trial, every challenge, every bullet fired under duress had contributed to this moment, shaping her into a soldier capable of commanding not only weapons but respect, trust, and fearlessness. Her thoughts drifted to the soldiers she had led, the lives she had influenced, and the legacy she was beginning to create. The battlefield, with all its chaos and unpredictability, had become her proving ground. The lessons learned there, calm under fire, precision under pressure, leadership in the face of fear, would follow her through every operation, every drill, and every future engagement. Had become more than a soldier, she had become an example, a standard, and a legend. In the final moments of the day, she stood outside one last time, the desert wind brushing against her face. The horizon stretched endlessly, a reminder that challenges would never cease, yet felt no fear. She had faced doubt, mockery, malfunction, ambush, and real combat, and had emerged victorious each time. She was prepared, disciplined, and ready to face whatever came next. The legend of forged in fire and discipline was only beginning, and the battlefield itself would bear witness to her skill, leadership, and courage for years to come. And as the stars emerged, sparkling above the silent desert, allowed herself a quiet, resolute thought. The battlefield would always be dangerous, unpredictable, and unforgiving, but she was ready. She had turned the rusty rifle into an instrument of mastery, chaos into order, fear into command, and doubt into legend.